Right. Good. Let's see. How do you measure food waste in St. Louis and your programs, such as what instruments or like mechanics do you use?
Yeah. Um, that's a really tough question and one that we're still trying to figure out, right? So the model we did with NRDC was based on a lot of research that they had done. So what we did basically was give them statistics from the region. So how many grocery stores did we have? How many residents? How many schools? How many hospitals? How many universities? All those kinds of things. And then they took that and based on other cities they've worked with, they came up with what they think we're generating based on all those statistics. Other ways that some organizations within St. Louis have gone about it is by doing something called like a bin dig or at home audits where they've asked people to actually weigh out food for a certain amount of time that they're throwing away. But that's just a sample. So it's only like one way of doing it. Restaurants have also done some waste audits through Earth Day 365 and Green Dining Alliance, where they've actually charted for a month how much they're throwing away. And so we've gotten some numbers through that, but it's not a holistic picture. Um, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources also does look at how much is getting thrown away. But the last time they did one of those studies was in 2017. I want to say is the last time one was published. So it's been almost 10 years since the last time that data was collected. So it's not a great number for looking at like how much we're making changes year over year. Um, and then we also work with some of the composting companies to look at how much are they taking in and how much is that changing. But again, that's just one number and it might have to do with have more people contracted with them. So there's a lot of different metrics we have, but I don't think we currently have like a perfect idea of exactly how much food is being thrown away. We have data points from a lot of different places, but it's an area where I think there's a lot of growth to happen.
Okay, right. So you said you've been using basically like a sample, like representation. Over the years, would you consider, or would you say like the statistics have stayed the same? Like, has the same amount of food been consistently wasted, or has it been increasing or decreasing?
That's a good question, and it would be hard to say. What I do know, one of the big changes that happened from when Missouri Department of Natural Resources did their study in Missouri, so again, that's across the whole state. Um, One of the big shifts between 2008 when they did their waste profile and 2017 when they did the next one is that previously the highest amount of material that was thrown away in 2008 was paper and cardboard. When we got to 2017, the highest percentage of waste thrown away was organics. So that includes
Wow.
like food as well. Now, does that mean that more food waste was like disposed of, or that we were throwing away less paper and cardboard? Like that's
Yeah.
a harder thing to say. And 2008 is almost 20 years ago at this point, and so like it's hard to compare. We do know that we have a lot more interest in composting and we have a lot more small scale composting services, so people have far more options if they want to look at composting as an option within their own homes, but I don't have like great numbers to say it's going one direction or the other.
Yeah. Right. So you don't like the organizations don't measure very often. It's like once every like couple of years. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's Missouri Department of Natural Resources who
Yeah.
actually helps to like permit landfills and actually looks at them. So they're the ones that do those metrics. Um, the landfills don't like every day measure how much food
Yeah.
waste is coming in. And so that's like a really hard number to pin down. Um, and sometimes restaurants, like some of the restaurants that participate in a food waste challenge will look really hard for a month at how much they're throwing away, but they might not do that as part of their regular practice. So it's hard to get exact numbers because there's a lot of people throwing a lot of food away, and most people are not measuring it very closely.
Yeah. Okay. So, what made you realize that food waste was such a major problem, causing you to like, start working at the botanical garden and helping against it?
yeah, and so I actually came to this issue after I started working at the garden, where we had another person on our team who had really sort of thought about food waste as an issue and really was interested in someone like teaching a class on it or doing some more. And so I sort of volunteered because I like learning about food, and it's sort of been like a thing I've been following for a while is how does a food system affect sustainability? And so sort of got the bug for it at that point and really interested in it. And then found out there was a group that was actually really looking at it. So ended up joining it and sort of kept going with it and learning more about it and then taking on more roles and helping to try and reduce it in St. Louis. So that was kind of where I had that initial interest, but it's just continued to grow over the years.
Yeah. So it was you just volunteered. Like, is there like I mean you just volunteered, right? For it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's an organization called East West Gateway Council of Governments. So they help to organize a lot of the government entities, both in Illinois and Missouri, that make up the St. Louis region to help make sure that, or try to help people plan together. Um, Even though we're in different counties in different states, but trying to unify some things. And so one of the projects they've had is called 1STL, which is really looking at sustainability in the region. So this food waste group is part of that overall plan. And so it was formed, I want to say this group started in like 2018 or 2019. So I came to it in 2020 after everything shut down. And so since my programs are mainly in schools were not really doing
Yeah.
very many programs. And so I was trying to find a way to apply some of the different things I was learning or had been teaching. And this was an opportunity to sort of dig in and start working in another area.
So with your experience, so like for like people like us who are just starting to advocate for this, what like out of all the information you know, what is like the most like eye opening or awakening piece of data that we should be sharing to get people to care more?
Oh boy, that is a good one. So I've got like our food waste and I've got our report pulled up right now. So I had like the numbers in front of me. One of the things that we modeled is that we think, based on models in the St. Louis region, we think we throw away about 667,000 tons of food waste
Wow,
every year in the St. Louis region.
that is a
It's
lot.
a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of potential to rescue it before it goes to the landfill. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So I find that to be particularly eye opening. The other statistic or like metric that we looked at a lot is just how much it costs, right? So, and this was from a study that was done in 2019. So again, think like pre 2020 and how much food prices have gone up. The average consumer in this 2019 study threw away about $1,300 worth of food every year.
Dang, wow, that's a lot.
Like, it's a lot of food
Yeah.
that people are throwing away. And so, like, those two pieces together, I think, are really um, yeah, they're really
Yeah.
eye opening, and I think it sort of can really awaken people to the idea of how much we're throwing away. On
Yeah.
average, our landfills are about 25. We're throwing away about 25% of the stuff that we're throwing away in landfills is food waste.
Wow.
Um, like it's a huge issue, and it has a lot of downstream effects in terms of like the amount of money we're spending on food that we're throwing away and the amount of people that still need food and how much could be rescued and paired with other organizations and trying to make sure that we're moving food around in a way um, that people can have access to it before it goes to the landfill.
Yeah. And it also wastes a lot of money, like $1,300. That's not just wasting food. That's a lot of money
per
too.
family.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in the US each year, it's about $400 billion,
Wow.
give or take, of food that's thrown away every year. So like it's it's not a small number. And so like this is not a this is one of those issues where I think it's not it's you're really making a very big difference at like an economic level, an environmental level, and a a human level by making some changes in how our food system works to better match the food that we have with people who need to eat it.
Yeah.
Like that, if someone is in poverty and is actively experiencing food insecurity, where should they go right away to like get assistance for food or with food?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Um, I don't necessarily work in sort of that area of making sure that of where people can go. The organizations that we personally work with that I think are doing really good work in this space. One of them that's more of a grassroots organization in St. Louis that's more mutual aid focused is called All Hands on Deck. So they do food shares, free food shares almost every day of the week. A lot of times they're on a regular basis. So it's like the Thursday night food share is always in this place. The Wednesday night food share is always in this place. And the food is given away for free. And it's often donated by restaurants or grocers or other places like that. And then volunteers help to distribute it and make sure it gets out to people. And we've really loved partnering with them. They've been a great organization. We also work with like St. Louis Food Bank and Operation Food Search a lot as well. But then there's other programs where people can get aid so that they can buy food from grocery stores. There's a lot of programs, a lot of groceries in St. Louis that participate with like double up food bucks, where if you spend a certain amount of money, you might get twice the amount of produce. And so there's a lot of different programs in there. I'm not an expert in all of them. I just know that we work All Hands on Deck, Operation Food Search, and St. Louis Food Bank have been good partners that help to distribute food.
So what are some wasteful everyday habits that like you personally think that if people stop doing, far less food would be wasted, and what are some ways that we can stop these habits?
Yeah, so on a household level, the things that we sort of notice the most is that, most often people are throwing away things like produce and leftovers are kind of the two biggest categories of things that get thrown away. So it's when you're thinking about shopping, especially with produce, making sure that you know how you're going to use it and that you're storing it properly. So not everything gets stored in the fridge. Some stuff is better stored in different parts of the fridge, sort of depending on what it is. And so making sure that you know the correct place to store stuff is really important to making sure it lasts long enough so that you can actually eat it. And then, if you're going to have leftovers, make sure you're eating them. I know not everybody loves them, but like trying to get as creative as you can with eating some of that leftover stuff. And then knowing your expiration dates. They're not real safety dates unless it's infant formula. Those are the only things where dates are actual safety dates. All other food, it's the manufacturer's best guess as to when it's going to be good by. But a lot of times things are good far after their expiration date. Using your senses, your nose, is one of the best ways to know if something is still good to eat.
So you said about the expiration dates and storage. So it's not, the problem isn't people like not wanting to eat them or just like changing their minds about it. It's like it going bad, like the produce.
With produce, a lot of times that's it. And I don't have like exact data on this, but I mean, I've talked with a lot of people. I think sometimes people are aspirational shoppers with their produce. Like when you're in the grocery store, you're like, yes, to this week, I'm eating all fresh foods. I've got a plan. And then by Tuesday, you're like, work is very busy, school's very busy. I'm going to eat out. And then it just sort of
builds up.
Goes to waste. So having a plan and sticking to it and being honest with yourself about who you're going to be during the week in terms of what you eat is one of the best ways I found to match what you're purchasing with what you're actually going to eat.
Very hard.
In the future, do you think technology will grow rapid enough to where we will be able to reduce food waste and its impacts on St. Louis?
From a technology standpoint, there are a lot of people who are looking at this, right? And so this is one of the things that we've been looking at within our St. Louis food ecosystem and haven't quite cracked yet, I would say exactly what the perfect one is, but there's a lot of apps out there that help to match people and like volunteers and food and organizations with each other, so that like if someone has extra food, they can post it, somebody can come get it and make sure it gets connected with somebody else. Right now we don't have one that's actively operating in St. Louis. There is one that started, I want to say a year or two ago, where like a business can opt in to post food and people can purchase it at a very low price. I think it's called Too Good to Go. And so that one started in St. Louis a little while ago, but that's still like purchasing food. So it's kind of like if someone has a bunch of stuff at the end of the night, they might bag it up and you can buy it for like 50% off or something like that. And so trying to figure out how to get some people better matched up is a place I think where technology can come into play. You know, I think there's a lot of grocery stores that are already using certain bits of technology to sort of look at how much are they purchasing and then how much are they selling and trying to make sure that it's moving well enough. But I think there's still gaps in ways that can improve a little bit to make sure that people are really using the inventory up, and maybe even tracking how long it's been there to make sure that it moves on to its next stage if it's not selling, and some other practices like that. We have some smaller like co-op grocery stores in the region that are a little bit better at that, but they are smaller, so they don't have quite as much inventory that they're moving, so they can be a little bit more nimble with how they put stuff on sale and things like that.
Okay. So beyond food itself, like when you just like throw a meal into the trash can that you would need, what other things are being wasted, just other than food?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I just looked at the numbers because I think it's dropped a little bit, but something like 15% of all of our fresh water use in the United
Wow.
States is used to grow food that nobody ever eats. Not food in general, just the food that nobody ever eats. So there's a lot of water that's wasted there. The other impact we honestly see is really on climate. So when food goes to the landfill, a lot of times when it breaks down, it's going to form a gas called methane. It's also going to form carbon dioxide, but the one in this particular context that we worry about is methane, because methane has a far higher potential to trap heat and is much more impactful on climate change and global warming than carbon dioxide is. Not that carbon dioxide is a big one, but there's been a lot of data in the past few years that methane has far more of an impact than we thought. So that when it does go up into the atmosphere, it's trapping heat, I think, far more effectively than we previously thought. So trying to keep it out of the landfill is like really the big goal. So we want to eat it because there's a lot of energy and resources put into producing food. But if for whatever reason at the end of the day it's not eaten, composting is like the absolute next best option because it keeps it out of the landfill, keeps it from forming all that methane, and then turns it back into a resource that we can use again. And both composting and reducing food waste are huge climate solutions. I would say paired together, if you put them together, often I'd put them in like the top 3 to 5 of climate solutions, looking at like global impact of what we can do. So there's a huge potential there to stop producing quite as much methane from landfills if we don't put food there.
Yeah. So does the food itself cause methane, or is it like the mechanisms in the landfills, or like the
It's a lot of the mechanisms in the landfill. So landfills, their job is to contain trash, toxins, any things that might be coming from trash, and they do a really, really good job at that. But part of the way that that's really effective and safe is that they squish a lot of air and oxygen out of the landfill. Oxygen in a landfill could be a potential fire hazard. It also takes up a lot of space, and they're trying to, put in as much as they can. And the bacteria that operate without oxygen, and so we say anaerobically, are often going to be creating far more methane than like bacteria that are living in a compost pile that are exposed to a lot of oxygen and actually helping to break stuff down. So it has to do with how stuff actually breaks down within the landfill.
Or so for us to like as students, since we're trying to spread awareness of food waste, what's like the best thing that you recommend us do to like help spread awareness?
Like in our schools.
Yeah, in our schools.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that schools really have a high potential to do is to look at like what are you doing within your own cafeteria, and so oftentimes that might be thinking about what kind of foods are being offered and what kind of choice do students have to make sure that they're eating as much of the food as they're purchasing in the cafeteria, especially when we look at programs where students might be relying on like free and reduced lunch, which I know is true in many, if not all of the St. Louis public schools, that there's certain things that have to be offered or served as part of those lunches. And so making sure there's enough choice so people can eat those things, but then also having compost available if for whatever reason people don't eat that food. And then some other best practices are making sure kids just have more time for lunch, which I know is a really hard sell in the school sometimes. But getting more time to eat is often a really effective way of making sure that students eat more. And so those are the things that we really see as being high value within schools in terms of shifting what the cafeteria does. We also really like shared tables, which is where if you get food and you don't end up eating it, there's certain items that you can put back that can be shared with other students. So it tends to be like anything that's packaged, any fruit with a peel or rind. So think like an orange, an apple, a banana.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes milk, as long as it goes back in like a cooler or a fridge, are things that can be shared again. And so having those practices set up and people know where they can go to get that food if they need it or where they can put it if they don't want it is another way that people can work on making sure that they're wasting less food in schools.
Yeah, I think that might be all the questions we had. So, just to touch back on what you just said, in order to like save more food in schools, we could like I forgot what it's called,
Share
but
table?
yeah, share table, share table. It's where you put food back like with like rinds and stuff and like milk. Okay. Um, and just another like personal question. Where have like you seen the most or like what have you seen people do that waste the most food? Just like a personal question for me.
That's a good. Do you mean like at schools, in life in general, in
Well, yeah, just in
homes?
general. Like where have you seen the most food waste happen?
Um, I think one of the things we see is, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different areas where I think we see people waste a lot of food, right? I think I've seen it in restaurants where the portions are huge and people just don't eat it all, and they might take it home, but they might not eat it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we see food on sale in like grocery stores and things like that, people way overbuy what they're actually going to eat, and they might not ever get to it. So trying to be honest about how you're spending your food dollars, I think, is a way we see it. At events, like big events, nobody ever wants to run out of food, but oftentimes there's way too much. So sometimes that gets thrown away at the end of the night. So if you are planning an event, trying to make sure that you're matching the amount of food to people. And then if you still have leftovers, making sure it gets distributed in the best way possible at the end of the night, or given out and given away. I'm trying to look here and see what else. I think, one of the other things is just that curbside composting and composting in general is just not a thing in St. Louis that folks are super used to as a service. There's other parts of the country where composting is way more common and people know a lot more about it. But there is a pilot study, so where they tried out curbside composting in Maryland Heights. I want to say in like 2017 they tried it out, and they got some good data from it, but nothing, like no other project came from it. So I think really taking another look at what curbside composting, meaning like food composting, where you put stuff in a rollaway cart or a pickup service, just like your recycling or trash, would be an interesting way of thinking about diverting more food waste from the landfill. It'd take a lot of planning. There'd have to be a lot of work with city services, and there's a lot that goes into it. But I think it's something that's really worth taking another like very hard look at when thinking about how we reduce our food waste.
Right. Before we wrap up, is there anything like you personally feel that we should know, like that's important towards this food waste field?
I mean, I think at the beginning you started asking a little bit about food access as well. And I think that's like the other piece of this is the one we talk about food donation. I think it is heavily linked to food access. And I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't have people who are relying on food donations or food banks or things like that to get their food, and that food would be affordable and accessible and fresh within their communities. And so like I think that's a really big piece of that when we think about food waste, is also trying to make sure that our food system is healthy and everyone has access to it. There is a group in St. Louis that is working a lot on food access as well, that we often partner with as part of this conversation and thinking about. It's not an area that like I have active expertise in, so that's why like I do this part, and we work with them on the other part for folks who really work in that area. But I think it's a conversation that's really worth having in a lot of communities too, is looking at access as well as donation and waste, and that all of these pieces are linked, and all of them do fit together. And so as we're thinking about fixing the food waste piece, fixing the food access piece, I think is really important as well.
Okay. Again, we recorded this and we're gonna post it on Instagram.